Hi guys, and welcome to Myths and Legends Part 2. Now, if you've been following my series of Lily and Sasha, these are running alongside it as we encounter different creatures and fairies and such as we go along. The last session, we actually spent time getting a lot of quests from Witherdale, so we didn't actually encounter any creatures. But what I thought I'd do is actually talk about Fighters Guilds, since the Fighters Guild actually show a very prevalent role in the game so far. How they're controlling that town and city and what they're actually doing. I looked up a history of it and I was so sad, but really kind of expecting. There was no such thing as Fighters Guilds. Now don't take that as there was no societies and sects and stuff that didn't teach people how to fight, but there was no specific guild that you joined just to learn how to fight and police. I thought what we could do is maybe go through tendencies of what guilds are, a bit of history, and then take on two people terms and organizations that I found that kind of resembles a little bit of what we're talking about with the guild, and maybe a little bit of resemblance towards what we're seeing in the game, and then a lovely story to end. So just to go through what we do as guilds, I'm not saying anyone's silly here, but just to give you an idea of what the dictionary says a guild is an association of craftsmen or merchants formed for mutual aid and protection and for the furtherance of their professional interests. So it's basically a group of people that have the same hobbies or the same craft, and they're joined together to look after each other. When you start actually looking more at what guilds are, they're actually organizations are becoming more relevant to what I see from a professional standpoint, more like trade unions and things like that, even to the point of actually I can connect them in their reference to my own daytime job. That's really fascinating for me to see those kind of connections between a guild and a professional business. So just to get the idea of some of the tradesmen that were seen back in the old days in medieval times, we're talking masons, carpenters, carvers, glass workers. These are some of the people who had things that they created that you couldn't just do because you felt like it. These are things where you actually had to be taught, and their crafts were secret. So the way that they did the traditions of how to do blacksmithing, for example, was generally passed from someone else. It wasn't a training guide that you could just pick up. They really controlled their craft in a way, in their trade, by building like guilds specific to that area. Now in Germany and Italy, they had really powerful guilds throughout history when you actually look a little bit more in detail, and they actually had a lot of considerable political power and influence, and even on occasion you can see them attempting to take control of the cities that they're in. So that really becomes relevant to what we're seeing in the Fighters Guild, how they are taking control of that little town. As far as going forward to saying to the inn that you have to give free board to the guild members, and not allowing people to leave the town for whatever reason without explaining themselves. So that kind of runs alongside what we're kind of seeing. The guild system became a target of criticism actually really late on, 18th to 19th century. So not really until recently did we start to look at the guild system and go, this doesn't work. A lot of that was down to the fact that they said that they opposed free trade, which kind of is true, because they were controlling trade. You had to go to that particular guild if you wanted that particular thing done. You couldn't just go to anyone to do it. They also said that they were stopping kind of technological advances and development of their businesses and the economy. So again, there's kind of truth to that. Karl Marx, for all you Marxist theories out there in sociology, he does have his book Communist Manifesto, and he does criticize the guild system for its graduation of social rank, which he pretty much puts it as a relation of the oppressor versus the oppressed in that system. Now, when you look at how the guilds are run, you can see what he's talking about. You start off at the lower levels as an apprentice, you move to craftsman, to journeyman, and then eventually to master and grandmaster. So there is a particular social climb that you need to make in guilds. What's very interesting is when you actually look at what they need to do in a guild, apprentice has just been an apprentice to another journeyman or master. To graduate for each section, it had to be approved by those who are masters or grandmasters of that guild. When you get to journeyman, which is the period of where you need to train to become a master, you actually go on what they call the journeyman years. And this is actually something that still happens in Germany and France now, which is where they travel around Europe, visiting masters from different countries and locations, learning more of their craft. And while they're doing this, they produce their own master craft item, which they then bring back after their years of travel to the masters of their guild. And those masters will make a decision as to whether that person deserves the title of master. So you had to work hard, really work hard, to get to that kind of level. And you kind of see this graduation in businesses. So a big push you've seen in England, if you have a look on government websites, is we really push apprenticeships at the moment, which brings younger students into the business environment and gives them a qualification while they work. We're kind of doing the same thing that the guilds did. We're having someone who comes in, works in the same position as maybe a craftsman does. They get paid less, but they get a qualification at the end of it. So if they pass the qualification, so again, it's not guaranteed, they have to pass the qualification, they then get that certification to the next level. And then again, you move up into management, to move up in the business, you have to interview, you have to prove yourself. You have to be able to show that you can do the job that they're asking you to do, or you have the ability to do it. So again, we kind of take the same structure that guilds have. So it kind of makes me laugh that they say, well, actually, they think they oppose business development. They don't. We pretty much structure our business development on the guild system. An important result of that structure actually is that they created the first universities in 1200. So we're talking Oxford, Paris. They all originated as guilds, and they were all students of knowledge. And they all went to these and created these first universities that we see. In England specifically, we have the City of London Corporation. So within this, there's 110 guilds or more, and they're now referred to as livery companies. These still exist to today. They're just called livery companies, they're not called guilds. And the oldest of them is more than 1,000 years old. This is an old system that has been going on, and it's been seen to work, and I think it works well. In 1878, those companies in London established the City and Guilds Institute of Forerunning of Engineering School. This is called City and Guilds College. They then became the Cities and Guilds of London Institute with the advancement of technical education. So maybe they've learnt from what their past guild buddies didn't, which is that they need to be part of the improvement and progression of today. The aim of the cities and guilds then became to actually become an examining and accreditation body. We're talking vocational, managerial, engineering qualifications for apprentices and for higher up. I will actually say I am in fact got 2 of these qualifications done by cities and guilds. So I was quite shocked to find out the history behind them. There is so much about them, really look into them if you have further interest, but otherwise I could be going on for hours and hours about them. I'm now going to look at 2 different systems very quickly, which kind of show very similar guild systems, but also control of towns and maybe with political influences and things like that, which I think kind of link up with the fighters guilds that we see in the game. So the first one is drug cartels, and I know that's kind of surprising, but they do have very, very good organization skills. Those of them that are very large and have a lot of control over trafficking operations. Now, the basic structure for a drug cartel starts at the basic, which is falcons, who are considered the eyes and ears of the street. You then have hitmen, who are the armed kind of people, the assassinations, kidnappers, those people. Then you've got lieutenants, and then to your drug lords. So again, they have this lovely progression within the system. And looking at it, you have to do certain things to progress in that industry. And most of the time, they probably involve someone above you dying before you can move up. So they have a very interesting way that they look at stuff. The next one, which by far is more fascinating to me, is knights. We've seen the history, we've seen them in movies. They're riding their lovely shiny horses with their shiny armor and things like that. But the knights actually were originally just people of noble birth who were trained to do things like swordsmanship, chivalry, horsemanship, and this is usually basically what we see as a warrior in the Middle Ages. Now, they have the very similar structure to guilds. So, to train to become a knight, you start off as a page. Now, that normally starts at about 7, at a really young age, and you'll tend to be a noble's son, most likely maybe the second or the third son, not the first, and they were sent off to be a page to a particular knight, and that knight's responsibility throughout their life until they're about 21 would be train them to become a knight in their own right. So a page is going to learn some of the horsemanship and archery and things like this. They're also pretty much going to be doing the dirty cleaning around the castle and things like that. They then progress to a squire, which is usually probably a few years in, like 10, even for some of them a little bit older. And at that point, they're going to be concentrating on more focused areas like strength, fitness, various weapons, and how to work as a team on horsemen. Because one of the very things about knights, and they worked as a team on their horses, which is why they were always very, very feared in battle. To become a knight after this point, when you become a squire, you're working until the age of 21. 21. So we're starting at the age of 7 to 20 freaking 1. So 14 years you were in training before you were even considered to be a knight. At this point at 21, you have to have a dubbing ceremony. Now, usually this is kind of a very simpler version of what we see now, which is the flat blade of the sword that goes on the shoulders, It used to just be a hand, and that was put below their neck. And they were pretty much sworn in to conduct themselves with bravery and loyalty and courage and chivalry. So you know what? That's a long period of time. So these two things, like knights and drug cartels, have the same system, and they all are working and trying to move their way up in the industry. But they all have secrets. They aren't telling other people how to become a knight. They're not training other people how to become a drug lord. These are all very secret societies in their own right. Everyone kind of knows that one of the most famous knights in history are the Knights Templars. So I thought I'd give a little bit background of them, and then I'm going to do story time on something I found particularly interesting. So Knights Templar, one of the famous knights that we know from history. So just for those of you who don't know too much about them, in 1120, there were a group of knights that saw the plight of pilgrims who were trying to travel to Jerusalem and were being attacked by Muslims. So they dedicated themselves to protecting these travellers, these pilgrims, to reaching their destinations. They were then given quarters in Jerusalem, and they were actually given one of the Jewish temples for the knights to stay in. The organisation of the Knights Templar, as I said above, pretty much works off the same as a guild. It's a military based, so you start off as a knight, a sergeant, chaplain, and servants. So start as your servant, your cleaners, chaplains, sergeant, knight. So you're working your way all the way up this process. Once you become a knight, there is within that their own progression to become master or grandmaster. All the knights were noble. They wore the famous white coat with the red cross. But only the knights and the sergeants fought. No one else fought within the Knights Templar. They became an integral part of defending what was seen as the Latin Kingdom at the time. They all had their own castles. So they were involved in affair of states, in the economy, political influence. So you can see right now how this kind of relates to the Fighters Guilds we're seeing. They're getting control of that town. They have influence over what happens. Maybe the Fighters Guild we're seeing, it has more brute force than the Templars, but essentially it's the same thing. They become a very integral part of that kind of country and that industry and that kingdom, that to pull them all out would have a massive effect on the area around them. Now, as you all know, the end of this story is the Knight Templars fell. They were banned out as for heresy by the king at the time in France, who owed them a large amount of debt, got his cousin, the Pope, to call them out. And this was a mass slaughter overnight on Friday the 13th. This was something that you don't see very often in history, and it all seems to be related to Catholicism most of the time. But they were tortured, burnt at the stake, made to say that they did things that they didn't. It was a very horrifying time. I won't go further into it because, again, there is so much that happened during that period of time that would just absolutely destroy you on the inside to think that people could do that. So these guys, for me, I like them as a version of the Fighters Guilds of the time and what we could see. And I have a really interesting story that I wanted to share with you guys that I found out about the Knights Templars. So in France, there's a place called Lutz. Now, this has, if you imagine avalanches and forests, mountains, lots of snow, a very remote part of France. Now, this is an area that pretty much for most throughout history was protected and was free from the main part of France. They're now a World Heritage Site because they actually have shown human occupation there dating back to 10,000 BC. That's mental. 10,000 BC. So, Lutz is also home to a well-preserved Templar church. And the church, called the Castle of St. Marie, sits in ruins. But just beyond that is an immaculately preserved parish church, which has got crenellated walls, towers, ramparts, gateways. It was built for people who weren't messing around, like the Knights Templars. Now, the whole thing sits on Cirque de Gavny, is a valley in the midst of the mountains, and in the Church of Gavny there are 12 skulls. Now, these are said to be the heads of Templars who were living in that church. The order for the Templars to be killed went out, and they believe that they were left there. There are no names, there are no bodies, and there is no information apart from these 12 skulls that are believed to be Templars. And there is a legend. It is said that every year, the spectre of Grand Master de Lamour enters the church and asks if there is anyone that is willing to fight for the order and for the temple. And one by one, each of these skulls will answer, none, the temple is destroyed. And while the legend is very little bit far-fetched, it is in a remote area, and it's in a self-governing village, and pretty much is something that has been passed on from generation to generation. So it's kind of interesting that we have this Templar church that's got these 12 heads with no bodies, no names, never been identified, and they've just been there and they've never been removed, and this castle has been well looked after, and it's just amazing to think that this is an area that was never kind of destroyed by anyone or had many fights and wars there. So it's kind of cool to think that maybe there were some Templars that survived and they were there. Or did the Templars get executed and the villagers took pity on them and saved their heads and put their heads into the church? We'll never know. You know, they might be just 12 random men, but it's kind of cool to think that they might be Templars. So I hope you guys have all enjoyed this. I will be posting a new video of Lily and Sasha So hopefully we will encounter something cool and I will do another Myths and Legends. But if you guys have any questions, give me a shout and comment. Or if you find something really interesting you want to let me know, please let me know. I love history and lore. It's awesome. And I shall hopefully see you guys all soon. Bye!